All right, welcome to a special live edition of On Texas Football. CJ Vogel. He's CJ Vogel. I'm Jeff Howe. Just got done wrapping up a player availability post-practice. Met with Arch Manning today. Also met with Trey Wisner, so we'll get to that. If you got any questions, please let them fly. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. CJ, your initial thoughts. This was our first scrum, on-campus scrum with Arch. We've gotten him in some bowl availability, some post-game stuff, but this is kind of the first, run-of-the-mill during the week scrum with Arch Manning. Give me your initial thoughts.
It was fun. Arch had a great personality. He's sitting there cracking jokes. He's got a good feel for the media. He told us, Jeff, it does get a little annoying having to deal with this everywhere he goes. We talked about it with him today, saying he went out to Mattel Rancho and folks coming up, taking photos with him, with he and his teammates. And he said, it's just the life I live. It's part of it. But he's got a good humor about it. He's got a good sense of dealing with us, right? Because, Jeff, you and I bring the hard-hitting questions each and every time that we're out here. But today, he basically sat back, had a great personality with it. And of course, Trey Wisner leading it off as well. Trey's going to give you, some good sound bites, some good things to talk about. So for the two of them, it was a really enjoyable media session, and I think Texas fans are really going to enjoy the next 2 years with Arch as the quarterback here at Texas.
Are we thinking for Trey that's probably the first and last time a Texas player is going to refer to Parker Livingstone as white chocolate in a media availability?
I hope not, because I love the name and I hope it sticks. The minute it's solidified and it sticks for good, Jeff, is when Arch Manning says it. But yeah, it's funny to hear that from Trey.
True. That used to be a rule back in the day. Is like until Quandre says you have a nickname, it's not a nickname. So I guess Arch has that responsibility now. CJ, I want to start with this. Actually, where do you want to go first with Arch? So we have a clip. I think we need to play.
Yeah, let's get to the clip. There's about 90 seconds here with Arch Manning, his opening statement. Some of the questions that we dove into, and then I want to hear from you, Jeff, about your thoughts about his preparation and what he took from Quinn Ewers in terms of now becoming the guy, the QB1 at Texas, and what that's like.
First spring is kind of the starter. How's that going for you so far? A couple weeks in.
Good. Feels good. We got a good team, a bunch of good guys. So I'm excited to start taking some more of the one reps.
Arch, how much time did you spend prior to this year going to some of the guys, who are now coming up here, the Aaron Butlers, Parker Livingstone, Spencer Cannons? Did you spend a lot of time with them when you were QB2 and QB3?
Yeah, I live with Parker and a bunch of those guys. When you're the backups, you spend a lot of time together in practice and getting those reps. So it's cool now. We're all running with the ones.
Can it be overstated, or just the importance of you got that game experience last year and you got a lot of experience, more than just a random backup? And how does that make the transition smoother?
Yes, sir, definitely. Anytime you can get game reps, that's just such a help. And I'm really glad I got to play in those games.
What was the biggest thing you learned, do you think?
Just, the speed of the game. It's also a good way for me to play in front of people, in front of 100,000. So that was definitely the biggest thing for me.
Arch, in hindsight, how much did Quinn try to help you over the last 2 years just to get you comfortable and get you ready to go now? Yeah,
Quinn's been great. I was just with him this past weekend at Hayden Connor's wedding. He's just been so good to me over the years. It's probably pretty annoying having me as the backup, just with all the media stuff, but he handled it like a champ, and he was so good to me along the way.
Do you think it's annoying with all the media stuff and it comes along?
For sure. Sorry.
No offense taken, Arch. We can be annoying at sometimes. I'll say this, CJ. I think the main thing Quinn probably helped Arch with the most. He mentioned the media side of it, kind of the good and the bad. I think it's specifically being the quarterback here at Texas, this place right behind me. It's different. And, we talked about it on the live stream last night with you, myself, and Rod. Name me a Texas quarterback other than James Street. They've been booed in the stadium, even the great ones. Vince remembers when he got booed. Colt can remember a time where he got booed. We all remember it through the years. Is that going to happen for Arch? I don't know, but he understands what the life of the fish. Look, this is a guy that ever since he stepped on a varsity football field is being ready for this moment. Everybody's been waiting for him to make this jump to be on the national stage. But it's different when you're the starting quarterback in Texas, when there's a fan base as big as Texas, an alumni network. You're the flagship school in the state most associated with football in the United States. So there's a lot that goes into it, CJ. Some guys can handle that pressure. And I think Quinn handled that pressure about as good as I've seen anybody handle it. Sam Ehlinger handled the pressure. We've seen some guys, though, that couldn't handle it. But that's my takeaway is what goes into playing quarterback here specifically at Texas. I think that's probably the thing that Arch is going to take most from Quinn.
Yeah, you mentioned basically his whole life has been building up to being the starting quarterback somewhere. And from a very early age, Arch said he's, the shirt that he was wearing, you saw it there, that burnt orange Longhorn logo shirt. He's been wearing that for basically his whole life. So he's been preparing for this. And, of course, his uncles, his father, his aunt, his grandfather, all of them have, in a way, prepared him for when it's his time to be QB1 wherever his college days were going to be. So, yeah, on top of that, Quinn Ewers, a good friend of his, said, block out all the media. You heard it there. Media can be a little annoying. I completely understand, and no offense taken, like you said. But point is, how can he take little tricks, tips, suggestions from Quinn and just block everything out? Because, the DKR is going to be packed. It's going to be cheering for 16. The loudest ovation that you hear for any announcement, for any introduction will be for Arch Manning next fall. But what happens when that first interception comes? And he said he knows. Sometimes it's at the quarterback spot, it's not going to be all smooth sailing. But he's prepared for it, and he's ready for what those ups and downs might look like with a level head.
And he's even said, because everybody talks about his uncles, and he even got asked about his uncles today. I'm sure those are the kind of questions he gets tired of being asked. But, I've heard him say in an interview, I think it was the interview with Marty Smith, what did he take from Eli? What did he take from all the guys? He said, you'll take Peyton's preparation, attention to detail from Eli. And I think this is another part of it. I can't think of many quarterbacks, CJ, two-time Super Bowl winning quarterbacks that were as chastised, as criticized, as knocked off the pedestal as often as Eli Manning was during his time with the Giants. So Arch has somebody he can go to learn how to deal with that. But so you got to assume it's going to happen. But I think if you're a Texas fan, I'm sure there's some Aggies and Sooners hate watching right now, and we thank you for tuning in. But for friends watching, the quote that I would take to heart, and CJ, you and I both put it out on the Twitter machine. Arch was asked in a couple different ways about, did he think about transferring? Did schools come after him? Blah, blah, blah. He said point blank, he said, I want to be the quarterback at the University of Texas. Sometimes things are worth the wait. And that, to me, that's going to be the one, CJ, that's printed on T-shirts. That's going to be on posters handed out in the stadium. That is a moneymaker for the athletic department from a marketing standpoint. That, to me, says everything you need to know about Arch Manning and how it feels about this program. Look, we've talked about it, man. There are so many rumors about Arch from people that literally had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. Because, CJ, you've been in this market long enough to know, you and I both been in this from the time Arch Manning committed to Texas. The Manning family wants out what they want out. And if you're not getting it from Cooper Manning, you're probably not getting it from somebody reliable. So there's been a lot of misconceptions, I think, about Arch and his quote-unquote market, even though there really hasn't been a market. Arch wants to be here. That family didn't make a decision half-cocked. He wants to be here. He wants to be the quarterback in Texas. He's waited his time. They knew Quinn Ewers was here when he committed. Now he's getting his chance, and I think he's making the most of it and building off. I know you asked him about the jawing back and forth at practice, the smack talk, because Trey Weisner talked about that, the juice getting going. And, I think Arch has been waiting for this time, and now that it's his, he's making the most of it, man. He's not tiptoeing into this. He's diving in head first, and he's amped about being the quarterback at the University of Texas.
Yeah, we heard from both Trey and Arch talking about that competitiveness, that fieriness in practice. And, we asked Arch basically, what's it like when Colin Simmons is chirping you? What's it like when Anthony Hill's chirping you? And he said, well, when Colin's chirping you, it probably can't be words that we can repeat. And I think that just goes back to how competitive it gets, Jeff. It's really fun to hear that in the sense of what we knew about this Texas team. And we also heard about it from Trey Weisner today saying, I think this team has a little bit more juice when it comes to, the guys on the roster, the guys at key positions in the roster who are now a third year, maybe a fourth year guy. It's their team now. It's no longer a team of the group of seniors from 2024 and certainly not 2023 who are long and gone now, but it's their team and they can kind of mold it and shape it how they want. Well, right now it's a lot of juice, a lot of energy, and a lot of competitiveness. I think Texas fans will take that 10 times out of 10. So for Arch to be that guy on the offensive side that gets the wide receivers, the running game, the offensive line all gelling, I think that's a great sign there.
the makeup of this team kind of reminds me of the 2008 team, just from the standpoint of, now look, Colt in 08 had more experience than Arch, but look, we go revisionist history on Colt, CJ, but that going into 08, you got to remember, coming off 07, Colt was 22 touchdowns, 17 picks as a redshirt sophomore. So it wasn't like he was a Heisman coming into there. And that 08 team had a similar mix where you had a few guys, Brian Arakpo, Roy Miller, Quan Cosby, Chris Hall, Charlie Tanner, and Colt. You had some guys that redshirted during that national championship season. You had a couple guys that actually played. But you had this influx of young, talented guys. You think about Blake Gideon, Earl Thomas, Sam Acho. You had kind of this group that had waited their turn and was ready to step into starting roles. And it was kind of reminds me of this spring, CJ, where you had, okay, there's some veterans that are still there, but we really want to see what these young guys can do. Now, I know the portal has changed dynamics since then, but the makeup of this team reminds me a lot of 08. And that 08 team, I mean, you had incredible leadership, but you had some of that same back and forth where, guys like Brian Arakpo and Roy Miller and some of those guys on offense, you get to chirp it back and forth, and it could get lively at practice. So plus, anytime you throw my football spirit animal, you throw Coach Will Muschamp into the mix, there's going to be some juice at practice. So I just think, and maybe that's Dwayne Aquina now coming in and bringing some of that juice too. I don't know, but at the end of the day, I think this is going to be a fun team just to kind of watch them grow. I know we all, I see Brandon Hewey and a couple other people talking about win-loss predictions in the chat. And we'll certainly get to win-loss predictions at some point down the road. And there are going to be high expectations for this team. But CJ, not to say I'm setting the bar low or I'm preparing myself for this team to fail, but I'm almost tempering my expectations just because I want to see this team grow and grow with Arch. As Arch grows into this role as a starting quarterback, as QB1, let this team grow with him. And hopefully it grows, like I said, hopefully by the time you get to November, you get to that Arkansas game, that A&M game here at home, hopefully this team's playing an elite brand of football that by the time they get maybe to an SEC championship game, a first-round playoff, whatever it is, a bowl game, everybody in the country is saying, man, Texas is the last team we want to see. And the talking heads are saying, man, you don't want to see Texas right now. They're rolling and they're they've hit their stride. They've figured it out. I think Texas could be that kind of team in 2025.
Yeah, and I think so as well. It's interesting you say how this group will grow with Arch and this current team as the spring progresses, as we go into summer, as we go into fall. Well, let's get into some of those young guys, right? You hear what Arch said about that wide receiving group. So, yeah, we've seen a lot about Parker Livingstone, obviously Jamie French, Khalil Lockett. He singled out Dalen McCutcheon as well. Kind of that group that we've heard is running with the first unit. Obviously, we heard Trey Wisner call Parker Livingstone white chocolate. I don't know, again, if that's a stamp of approval yet from Arch or not. But for Parker Livingstone to earn that nickname already, that's a great sign for what he could contribute this spring. Of course, we've heard great things on that side. But we also asked Trey Wisner a little bit about that running game, right? He said, hey, Christian Clark returning back from that Achilles injury, he doesn't run timid, right? He's not playing with timidness, and that is very important, right? When it comes to those Achilles injuries and when it comes to those knee injuries, how do you trust your knee? How do you trust that ankle to make a one cut and go? To hear about Christian Clark 8 practices in, great sign. But we also heard about James Simon, and Trey Wisner, I think, described it very well. He gets skinny, he gets small, and he gets through really tight places. Got to be able to do that in college football, especially the SEC, when these front sevens and running games get so compact. So really positive to hear that on the running game and in the receiving room. But one other name that we've heard a lot about, Jerry Hamilton's mentioned plenty about this guy already so far, but Trey Wisner had this comment about Nick Brooks that made me think, man, if he's doing this 8 practices in, he's going to be a heck of a football player. So all in all, really positive to hear about, the 2 running backs, that group of wide receivers and Nick Brooks. I think this running game is going to be really talented. Neto Umeozulu singled out as well. So we're hearing a lot about the offensive line individually. Now it's all about piecing it together the second half of spring ball here. Oh, these running lanes, this pass protection, really, really good.
Yeah, so Trey was asked about which old linemen have stood out. He specifically mentioned Neto and Brandon Baker as 2 guys. And then he was asked about the true freshman. The one you mentioned something he said about James Simon. The other thing that kind of got my attention, and by the way, Sark mentioned James Simon unsolicited on Tuesday too. So start filing that away, these guys that are getting talked about right now. But he said noobs don't pick it up as quickly as James Simon has. And we knew he was probably going to be a quick study, but the fact that he's picked it up really fast to the point that it's impressed Trey Wisner, a guy that's been here for a couple of years, that's something to file away. Trey also mentioned Khalil Lockett as one of the freshmen that's looked good so far. And then, again, CJ, I mean, Nick Brooks, there's been quite a few of these freshmen and guys that have been surprises. I think for me, Nick Brooks might be the biggest surprise of spring practice because a guy that he's the backup left tackle. He's gotten himself into the mix at right tackle. Everybody's talked about him that we've talked to, and granted, it's just been Sark, Arch, and Trey Wisner, but for them to be talking about him in the way they have, you feel like he was one that, you looked at it, okay, his recruitment was kind of weird. There was all did Georgia really want him? Who was Texas fighting for at the end? This tells me that Kyle Flood hit a home run with Nick Brooks just based on the early returns. You needed one of these freshman linemen to be able to step up and give you something. And it looks like Nick Brooks is going to be the guy that might be, I'm not saying he's going to play in every game this season, but he's a guy that we could see him, CJ, maybe take that Cameron Williams route where, hey, get him on the field goal PAT team just to get his feet wet. And then maybe we're talking about a guy in 2026 that's, hey, because I'll just throw this out there, man. Trevor Goosby's draft eligible after this season. So, we may be talking about Nick Brooks at this time next year needing to step into a starting role. I think at the very least he's going to be competing for a starting spot.
All in all, this goes back to Sarkisian wanting to get these younger guys more reps early in the season so that they're prepared should injury happen later on. We saw it with Trevor Goosby last year. Sark kind of second-guessed himself, saying, I don't know if we prepared him enough. But to your point, hearing that about Nick Brooks, very much a positive. Jeff, I'll leave it with this. I want to go back a little bit to Trey Wisner's comment about the juice. To hear the chirping, the competitiveness from Arch and going back with the defense, that's going to be a big theme for the rest of spring. It feels like there's more of a chip on this team's shoulder than in years past. And I think that is, Texas has come a long way since 5-7. It's come a long way from 8-5. But there's still that chip of you've gotten close 2 years in a row, but haven't gotten over the hump. Right now, hearing from Trey, hearing from Arch, it feels like this team is out to prove something, especially with a lot of new faces and a lot of key positions.
I think the great thing Sark has done, CJ, the last 2 off seasons, is he's identified something to keep the team hungry. After coming off that loss to Washington, it was, hey, think about how close you were. You got to be obsessed. If you want to get back there, you got to be obsessed with it. I think for this team is everybody's talking about what you don't have. You lost 4 starters on the offensive line. You're going to lose a first-round wide receiver. You're going to lose a Jim Thorpe Award winner. You're losing the Outland Trophy winner. You're losing all this. Does the Nash and look, Sark can say what he wants, but he'll use the outside stuff. He's even talked about it sometimes. He'll use it, as not motivation, but just to show guys what's being said. But I think Sark's going to use that internally. At least he'd be smart to say, hey, there's a lot of people that are waiting for you guys to fail. Now's a chance to prove them right. This is your time to sit at the head of the table. The Cole Hudson, DJ Campbell conversation, CJ, to me, it's a microcosm of this team. You've lost some great leadership off of the last 2 teams. Some of those guys now, a DJ Campbell, a Cole Hudson, and Anthony Hill, even a Colin Simmons. We know Michael Taft's taking on that role. Some of these guys, it's their turn to sit at the head of the table. And now that they're in that role, how are they going to handle it? Again, go back to the 08 team. We saw Brian Arakpo and Roy Miller and Quan Cosby, that leadership core. They were ready to sit at the head of the table and make that their team. And that team took on the personality of those guys. This team will take on the personality of their leaders. I think who comes out of this spring as that leadership core. Hey, if it's Arch and DJ Campbell and Anthony Hill and Manny Muhammad and Colin Simmons, this team's going to have some swagger about them. They're going to have that bravado. They're going to puff their chest out a little bit. So I'm looking forward to that, CJ. Look, if you can do that and back it up, then hey, more power to you. But I like a team that feels good about itself. Not to where you're like we saw some Tom Herman teams and even some Charlie Strong teams at times get overconfident when there was really no reason to. But I'm talking about being confident, having that swagger of, hey, we'll come out here, we'll tell you exactly what we're going to do, and we'll still run it down your throat, or we'll still stuff whatever you throw at us, even though you know what we're doing. So I think that bravado, that confidence is getting ready to show out.
I agree as well. And we'll have more from today's media availability on the winning drive at 3:15. So come join me, Coach Shipley, and Rod Babers as we break that down. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today. And, as we sign off today, look, again, I think the vibes are very high. So we'll have more clips. We'll hear from Trey Wisner a little bit later this afternoon as well. But for now, that'll do it for today's player availability.
If that Arch Manning quote, CJ, isn't on a T-shirt by, lunchtime tomorrow, I'll be very disappointed in someone out there with the entrepreneurial spirit to do that. That should be done ASAP.
Get Bobby on the phone. Well, that'll do it. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll catch you this afternoon. Hook 'em.
Hook 'em.